to hear my sermon, and I have a big responsibility now to make him feel good. Can you hear me well?
Only when you go to the left.
Is that working?
Make sure you're on. He's on. He's just got it on the side.
I am ready to go get it over. Anyway, okay. So, anyway, today we're going to talk about Daniel chapter 8. We're going to continue the series that Pastor began, and Elder Mike spoke, my opinion, talking about 4 beasts. I only have to talk about 2 and a little horn, you know. But I can't really do it alone. It's not going to be a sermon. It's more going to be a discovery, maybe a little bit of a lecture, if I'm smart enough. But if we can do this together, it will be interesting. If you just listen to me, you're going to get tired and fall asleep. We have to read the chapter, and it's 27 verses. Can we do that? Okay, let's start then. In the chapter 8, in the 3rd year of the reign of the king Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in province of Elam, and I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the banks of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. And I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns which I had seen standing on the banks of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of there came up the 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. It grew great even to the hosts of heaven. And some of the hosts and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And the host will be given over to it together when the regular burnt offering because of the transgression, and it will be throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgressions that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and host of the trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having an appearance of man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand this vision. That's verse 17, so 10 more to go. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand up. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the later end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in the place of which four others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the later end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not only by his own power, and he shall cause fearful destruction, and he shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. In our church, we talk about Daniel's prophecy, I'd say a lot. I heard about it several times. And to be honest, preaching on the prophecy, on Daniel's prophecy, it's not easy. But it's important. When I was doing my research online, I realized how many people out there don't believe the same way that we do. And I can honestly say that the way that we believe, I believe is truth. It's easy for me to say because I believe that thing, right? Others may disagree with me. But I think we have some facts to prove our point. But you go on YouTube, you go on Google, and you type in Daniel chapter 8 or the whole Daniel and see what other people think about our future. And you'll be surprised how many different ideas and explanations of what Daniel was told there is. So I think it's important for us to know where we stand, to be able to explain to other people, hey, listen, this is how it goes, and I can show you this. So let's take time together. Let's look at this, and let's once again prove our point that as our Seventh-day Adventist belief in Daniel's prophecy, I think has many great it's laid out in a way that it's easy to understand and it makes sense. Daniel chapter 8 is about 2 animals, the ram and the goat. Question for you, any of you owned a goat before or a ram? No? None? Have you seen goats? Right? I mean, they're tiny little things, kind of, you know, they're harmless. Really, they are. I mean, they can bud you maybe a little bit, but nothing serious. Those who drive ram trucks, You know why they called ram? Because they're bullish, right? They're powerful. They can do a lot of destruction. And they're looking for trouble. They're always looking for trouble. Now, interestingly, in this chapter, everything happens the other way around. Ram, who is very powerful, is being struck down by what? A goat. A goat with a horn between its eyes, almost like a unicorn. Just a goat. But we'll get back to it. Just think about it in those terms and ask yourself, why is the goat more powerful in this sense? Now we have to think about it in historical terms because we're looking at the history, right? If we start in the verse 1 and 2, Daniel received the vision 12 years before the fall of Babylon. Since Babylon was about to overthrown, the vision of this chapter begins with Medo-Persia. And this chapter is also a repeat of chapter 7. So if you look at the chapter 7 and the 4 beasts that were explained there, you can see the similarities between the beasts. The ram is Medo-Persia. The 2 horns, and we read that one was bigger than the other. And if we look at the history, that's how Medo-Persia kind of took place. The 2 horns represent the 2 parts of the empire, with the Persians, the younger of the 2 nations, becoming dominant over the Medes. At the height of its power, the empire has conquered more than 6 times as much land as its predecessor, Babylon. So when we read and we see that the ram was charging east and north and west everywhere, they grew 6 times bigger than Babylon. And so this picture kind of, I don't know if you can see it well with all the light, but it became huge. It basically almost conquered the whole known world at that time. So again, let's read about the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. That's how this empire was. It grew 6 times larger than Babylon. Nobody could stand against it, and it was very powerful, very destructive on its way. Now, in the second part of the chapter, Gabriel tells Daniel what those animals represent. How crazy is that? I mean, angel comes to Daniel and says, listen, you're going to be dead by then, but there will be 2 empires after you, and this is going to be Media and Persia, the first one, and then after them is Greece. What kind of man should I be so the Gabriel can come to me and say, this is the future? We often don't think about this, but we can learn something from Daniel. We can learn a lot of things from Daniel. One is that he dedicated his life to God. And we can see that in his lifestyle. Being able to pray 3 times a day, no matter what. Being put to a lion's den for that. But there's dedication on his part. And God is willing to open his future, open the future of the world to him. I can't say that you and I are different from Daniel. We have the same human body, same struggles that he went through. But what's different is that he was determined to live a lifestyle closely connected to God, closely connected to God. And I think that's why we know what we know, because of his dedication to a close relationship with God. Now, we kind of covered the ram. Media and Persia grew 6 times larger, and we can see that throughout history. Let's talk about the goat, like Greece. It says that a goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. And the horn really represents Alexander the Great. Why the goat? Very peaceful animal. Well, Greece, if we look at the history of Greece, it was not even a country. It was 10 city-states. Basically, they were not united. They were kind of everyone to themselves. So they didn't pose a threat to Medo-Persia at all. But then comes Alexander the Great. And the force with which he conquers the whole known world, I think it was 8 years that took him, 8 or 10 years that took him to conquer the whole known world at the time. It's just, I mean, it's very fast. It's very fast. And we find proof of that is by saying that the goat never touched the ground. It was so fast, right? Interesting thing, I was always fascinated about Greece and the military and the Rome and its military. Alexander was one of the first, and his father was one of the first, who introduced a new way of military formation, which called the Greek phalanx. Basically, it's a square and very huge spears. So when they walk in the formation, nobody can get close to them. And if you get a chance, watch movie Alexander. There is a battle between his army and the army of the Persians. The facts are that there was only 47,000 of Greeks and about 100,000 of Persians. They realized that Alexander is going to be a very big threat for them. So the Persian king, he chose the plain called Gaugamel, I think. He chose that field to meet Alexander with his army. It was plain, it was perfect for the chariots that Persians had. It was just all the way through, it was good for Persians to win. And they had such a majority. I mean, more than twice they had more than twice force. But this infantry and this formation was able to stop chariots running towards them. And you can Google the whole battle, how it went, but Alexander lost 700 men, from what I know, and Persians lost 20,000. I think it's 20,000, something like that. Maybe not quite that much, but a lot. And the battle was so fast that the Persian king just ran away. He just fled. He left his whole army. He fled. And later on, he was killed by one of his own men. But when I look at the beast that is described here, a goat with a horn, very fast, not even touching the ground, I can definitely see Greece throughout history. And the funny thing is, Gabriel tells that Daniel before it happens, before it even takes place. Verses 5 and 8. Verses 21 and 22 identified the goat as Greece. The notable horn between his eyes was Alexander the Great, who came from the west and defeated the armies of Persia. Alexander died without an heir at the height of his power. He died when he was 32 years old. 32 years old. So, and in this place, when they asked him, so Alexander, you're about to die, who's going to be your successor? And he said, you know what he said? Whoever's the strongest. And so all the generals began to fight with each other, and only four by the time there were only four left, they figured they would divide his empire, and that's how it was divided. So that's where the four horns come up. The one is stricken, the Alexander the Great. They would never have the same power as Alexander had, never. And in fact, what happens later, and we can read that, out of them, verse 9, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the west, east, towards the glorious land. It grew great even to the host of heaven. Okay. So, the little horn starts with the pagan Rome. And then it takes transition into the papal Rome. We know from Daniel 2 and 7 and from the history that the power which followed Greece was Rome. In chapter 2 and 7, it was shown in two phases, pagan Rome and divided Rome. We saw in chapter 7 that the religious power of papal Rome rose to dominate the divided empire. This vision represents power. The physical actions of pagan Rome against God's people are symbolic of papal persecution of God's people and their true worship. So we know how Rome took place and how later on Christianity took over the paganism. We can see that in history. We can see how the statues in Rome were renamed. What was the pagan god became a saint or something else, or called a Christian name. The power of pagan Rome declined over time. It was from 351 to 476 AD, and the power of the papal Rome increased as the church accumulated more power and influence when the Emperor Constantine blended paganism and Christianity into one around 321 AD. Rome became the religious capital of the world. In 538 AD, the Emperor Justinian issued a decree proclaiming the Pope to be supreme in religious matters. Since then, the Pope has assumed the garb of the representative of Jesus Christ on earth. So if we read the chapter 8 closely, we can see that that horn that grew up exceedingly great was aiming to take away the place of the Prince of Peace, right? Let me find that verse. The Prince of the Host. It became great, even as great as the Prince of Host. So, how many of you, well, I shouldn't probably ask, it's going to be a very long answer, but we know throughout history that papal Rome was ruling our world for a very long time. And there are many facts how Pope would condemn kings and queens and make them do things for the church, or do things that the church thinks, you know, it's the right thing to do. It was totally ruling the world and named itself a representative of Christ on earth. When we see other interpretations of this chapter, I can't help but wonder why people don't see this. Why people don't see papal Rome as the horn that is represented in this chapter. Why do people look for something else to happen in the future and think, well, maybe it's going to be Russia or something else, or, you know, these things already happened. It's already happened. What we live in is, what we can do is we can count the 2300 evenings and mornings. What do they represent? What do 2300 represent? Years. It represents years. Now we know when it started. No, we don't know when it started, sorry. The time period cannot be literal, and we talked about it, because it would be only 6 years, so it represents 2300 years. The angel does not give the starting date in this chapter, but we know it's sometimes during the reign of Medo-Persia, which was the first kingdom of the prophecy. Let's do the quick comparison of the fourth beast and its little horn from the chapter 7 and the little horn of the chapter 8. We see that they both represent the same power. So if we look at the chapter 7, which Elder Mike presented last time, it was the great, scary animal with 10 horns, and we think that, you know, Europe was, as the empire kind of collapsed, you know, there was 10 different countries and things like that, and it would make war with saints. It would, you know, be exceedingly grateful. Chapter 8 talks about kind of the same thing. It would destroy mighty and holy people. It would magnify himself and be broken without hand. So, kind of covered papal Rome and what it had become. My question in this chapter 8 is, why did Daniel faint it? I mean, that kind of spoils the whole thing. You know, here's Gabriel ready to tell the story, and Daniel is not willing to listen to the end. It would be awesome to know the starting day of 2300 days, because then we can know exactly when it stops, but we don't. We don't know. Some people say that chapter 9 may have an answer to that, so you'd have to listen very closely to whoever is preaching next time. But to me, what this whole thing represents is that the Bible is very clear about our history. We can see that. We can see many facts that supports this picture. What we have to worry about is that we live at the end of 2300 days. We do. And so if everything came through, and some people think, well, maybe at 2300 days, maybe it's a mistake or it will not come through. We're mistaken. It will happen. What will happen afterwards, we know. And I want to encourage you to be mindful of what we know, what our faith knows, and be able to tell that to other people. Not to be shy about it, because it matters. It's a matter of life and death, really. So I would like to invite you to pray with me, okay? Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for the prophecies that you give us. I thank you for ability to see the history and the things that took place. And Lord, I pray that as your followers, we will be able to show other people what's going to happen in the future. Lord, I ask for your blessing as we go about our day. Amen.